Hello and welcome back to The Creative Catholics, a podcast on creativity, faith, and the hidden life. I'm your host, Alex Cahill. Before we begin, I want to thank Marie Miller for letting us use her wonderful music for the intro and outro. I also want to thank Riverside, who sponsored this episode. If you need to record or edit audio files, please check out Riverside in the link in the show notes and in the description for this episode. So, when I was in third grade, a new girl joined our class, and she was Protestant. I went to a Catholic school, but she was Protestant. And I remember she had this Lisa Frank notebook. Now, if you're around my age, you'll probably know exactly what I'm talking about. It was super bright colors, dolphins, leopards, unicorns. It was peak 90s. But what caught my attention wasn't actually the notebook itself, but there was a sticker on the front that read, "Let go and let God." And I'd never heard that phrase before, but over the years since then, I have heard it countless times. It's become one of those kind of well-known Christian sayings that seem to pop up everywhere. They're on mugs and wall art and journals. And if I'm honest, I never really liked it. Not because I think it's wrong. I mean, I actually think there's a profound truth in those words. But the problem is that over time, I think we've often misunderstood what those words mean. Sometimes the phrase can sound as though God is asking us to stop trying, stop dreaming, stop planning, stop creating, as though holiness means becoming passive. But there's another phrase I've heard over the years from St. Ignatius, and it's also one of those that I've wrestled with and struggled with quite a bit, and I'm sure you've probably heard of it as well. But it says, work like everything depends on you, pray like everything depends on God. And at first, it does sound really inspiring, but if you actually stop to think about it, I find it very confusing. Because which is it, right? Does everything depend on me or does everything depend on God? Can both actually be true? And for a long time, I felt like I had to choose between them. Either I worked really hard and quietly carried the weight of making everything happen or thinking I was making everything happen, or I stepped back and said, well, God will sort it out, hands off sort of thing. But I don't think either of those is the Catholic understanding. The Church doesn't teach that we're meant to do everything ourselves, nor does she teach that we simply sit back and wait for God to do everything for us. The Church actually teaches us something much more beautiful. It doesn't call us to be spectators. It calls us to be co-workers with God. And the Catechism puts it really, really beautifully. So in Article 307, it says, God grants men the dignity of action on their own. But through work and prayer, they can also cooperate with Him in bringing His grace to fruition in their own lives and in the lives of others. And I love that phrase, cooperate with Him. We're not replacing Him and we're not sitting back and waiting for Him, but we're also not asked to do everything ourselves. We're asked to cooperate. And that's the rhythm of the Christian life, right? God acts, we respond. He gives the seed, we cultivate it. He gives the gifts, we develop them. He gives the calling, we say yes. It's never either or, it's always together. God didn't ask Noah to sit back while he built the ark. He didn't ask David to wait until Goliath falls over. He doesn't ask the apostles to stay on the shore while he fills the nets. And he doesn't ask us to stop using the gifts he's entrusted to us. So maybe letting go doesn't mean caring less. Maybe it means just holding things differently. Because I don't think God is asking us to let go of our dreams. I think He's asking us to loosen our grip on them. Noah still built the ark, but then he let the waves carry it. The apostles still got into the boat, even if they doubted that they'd catch any fish at all. And Mary still said yes, even though she had no idea how Christ's conception would actually happen. They all acted, but they acted with open hands. And I found myself coming back to this idea, and one simple sentence kind of runs through my head when I think about this. It's work wholeheartedly, but hold everything loosely. I think that's what Christian surrender looks like to me. We work with all our heart. We show up, we practice, we learn, build, write, paint. We can record the podcast or start the business. We definitely should love our family and give God our absolute best, but we don't cling to the outcome because the outcome was never ours to own. And I think this is especially difficult for creative people because we creatives, we care deeply. We pour ourselves into our work. We imagine it. We nurture it. We spend months or years bringing something into the world. It's very easy for a project to quietly become something that we clutch. We grip it tighter and tighter. Will people like it? Will anyone listen? Will this podcast grow? Will this painting sell? Will this book get published? Will this business succeed? None of those are bad questions. The problem isn't caring. The problem is confusing stewardship with ownership. And God has called us to the first, but we often live as though we've been given the second. We steward the gifts, but God owns the harvest. The problem isn't caring deeply about our work. The problem is believing that it ultimately belongs to us. One of the passages that kept coming back to me while I was preparing this episode was the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. And we all know the story. A master is about to leave on a journey, so he entrusts his property to 3 servants. To one, he gives 5 talents or bags of gold in some translations. To another, he gives 2, and to another, he gives 1. And then he leaves. But importantly, the talents never become the servant's property. The master doesn't say, here, these are yours now. He entrusts them to their care. They're still his, the master's. The servants are simply stewards. And I think that's a profound distinction because isn't that true of our creativity, our imagination, or our ability to write or to teach or to encourage or even to raise children? Our time, our opportunities, our relationships, none of these ultimately belong to us. They've been entrusted to us. And one day, like the servants in the parable, we'll stand before the master and give an account, not because God's waiting to catch us out, but because he lovingly entrusted us with things that are very precious to him. And he wants to know what we did with those things. And perhaps the most beautiful part of the parable is that the 2 faithful servants don't cling to what they've been given. They invest it. They offer it back. That's what stewardship looks like. Not hiding our gifts out of fear like the unfaithful servant, not clinging to them out of pride, but using them generously because we know they were never ours to begin with. And when I realized that, actually something changed in me. It was a moment when I stopped asking, how can I make the most of my talent? Which I think is a question a lot of us have in our heads. How can I make the most of the talent that God's given to me? But the question shifted for me. And I started asking, Lord, how do you want to love the world through the gifts you've given to me? And a way for me to picture this, I want to share it with you. So imagine a master gardener entrusted you with one of the rarest plants in the world. And before leaving, he said, look after this for me, water it, prune it, give it everything it needs to flourish. And while you're caring for it, you are more than welcome to take cuttings and propagate that. In fact, I'd love if you did that and that there would be another one of these plants when I return. How would we treat that plant? You wouldn't clutch it so tightly that you crushed it. You wouldn't hide it away in a cupboard because you were afraid something might happen to it. You'd give it sunlight. You'd water it. You'd care for it. You'd patiently help it grow. And because the gardener had invited you to, and you understood the rarity and the importance of this plant, you would joyfully propagate it. And I really think that's what God has done with each one of us. He's entrusted us with precious gifts that ultimately belong to him. Creativity, compassion, wisdom, leadership, but also our art, our families, our relationships. Whatever he's placed into your hands, he doesn't ask you to hide it. He doesn't ask you to cling to it either. And he certainly doesn't ask you to bury it out of fear. He asks you to cultivate it, to let it grow, to allow it to bear fruit, to share it generously so that his goodness continues to spread through the world. Because perhaps that's what stewardship really is, not simply taking care of God's gifts, but helping them multiply. So my brother-in-law is a priest in Ireland, and he has a gift of delivering solid homilies. If you haven't listened to him before, check out Paving the Way Home podcast. His name's Father Patrick Cahill, but his homilies sometimes, they hit right to the heart. And a couple years ago, he actually did a homily on a very similar idea to what I'm talking about today. And in that homily, he was talking about how the things we hold on to most tightly often reveal where our deepest fears lie. Why am I not willing to surrender it? What outcome am I desperate to control? What dream feels too precious to me that I can't place it in God's hands? Because perhaps that's the very place where actually God wants to meet us. And it makes me think about the rich young man in Mark 10. Jesus doesn't ask every disciple to sell everything. He asks this young man because Jesus always puts his finger on the thing that we grip most tightly. For the rich young man, it was wealth. For someone else, it could be reputation or comfort. Jesus wasn't trying to take something good away from him. He was trying to free him from the thing that owned his heart. And we see the same thing with Abraham and Isaac. God never intended Isaac to become an idol. Before Abraham could become the father of nations, he had to demonstrate that even his greatest gift belonged first to God. Sometimes God asks us to place our Isaac on the altar, not because he delights in taking gifts away, but because he refuses to let his gifts actually become our gods. Jesus said, actually, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And maybe another way of asking this is, where is our clenched fist? Because whatever we refuse to surrender often reveals what we're relying on most. And this also reminds me of St. Augustine's idea of ordered loves. So he didn't say loving created things is wrong. He said we suffer when we love good things out of order. So our project, our businesses, our families, our creativity, these are all wonderful gifts, but they become really heavy when we ask them to provide the security that actually only God can give us. And maybe that's why holding our creativity with open hands matters so much, because open hands can receive God's gifts, and open hands can offer those gifts back to him. But closed fists can't do either. 1 Corinthians 4:2 says, moreover, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful, not successful, not famous, faithful. Because perhaps the question isn't necessarily what do I need to let go of? Perhaps the better question is, what am I afraid to place back into God's hands? Because whatever comes to mind first, that might be the place where God is inviting you to trust him more deeply. And I think that's the posture God invites us into. To hold everything with a loose grip, not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters enough to place it into his hands. So whatever work is in your hands today, hold it well, hold it faithfully, but above all, hold it with open hands. Because open hands are ready to offer everything to God, and open hands are ready to receive whatever he wants to give us. Until next time, stay creative and keep making what matters most.